Salem, welcome to Let's Talk. This is John Kane. I am your host and producer, and I've got Shawnee Rice joining me as a co-host. And we've got an interesting show this week. I want to do a few things. I do have to first off announce that we are not Facebook Live today. For some reason, my system isn't really working quite right, and I am recording the show. I'll post up the video with the audio on it later on, so we'll get it up, but it won't be posted as a Facebook Live video. Unfortunately, for something's happening. My Facebook's not connecting. Something's not happening anyway. And you get to go live, and as soon as you get set to go, all of a sudden these things start showing up. You get pop-up windows, and so that's what we got here. So we are doing the show here. We are on WBAI FM 99.5, and of course we're out in the world on www.wbai.org, so you can catch us streaming no matter where you're at. And we will post this video up and the audio up on our podcast and our YouTube video channel. So, all right. First off, I got to thank those who came out last week. We had a great show. Not only did we do a good show last week and had Jeff Doreen and Laura Kuji, my new favorite poet, No Rainbow.
So good. Such a good.
Yeah, it was really great. So these guys came in and did a great show with us here on Let's Talk, and then we did our monthly event downstairs, and they banged it out. They did a good job. Jeff wasn't feeling real well. He was actually having some lingering effects of a concussion that he'd received, but man, he stepped up and put on a great show, and of course Laura did a great job as well.
Both nights.
Yeah, so they did an event. Were you there at the American Indian Community House as well?
Yeah.
And so that was pretty good too?
Yeah, it was pretty good. Jeff also wasn't feeling well that day too, so he just made it work for 2 days. I wonder how it went
3 days, because apparently the thing went off in New Jersey City. They did the Beatles Fest, so that went off pretty well. So again, I want to thank all of you who came out. Those of you who contributed that helped us offset some of Jeff and Laura's costs, and of course made a little bit of a contribution to WBAI as well. I want to thank you guys for supporting the events that we do. We do a variety of things, everything from films to speakers, and in some case musicians, and so it was a good event. So that's so I want to thank you guys for participating in all of it. So anyway, look, this week I want to make sure that we do something we haven't had much time to do. I got to tell you, I'm still struggling with this idea of doing a talkback show in a 1 hour time frame. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to give as much time to callers as I would like. So we're going to try to do more of that. But I do have a topic that came in front of me, because Pat Buchanan, who is an evangelical right-wing, well, I'm going to call him a nut, but I guess I did.
Macadamia.
Anyway, he writes a weekly column, or maybe it's even more than, maybe it's a daily column, I don't know. But he writes a column that is carried by a bunch of newspapers. And one of the newspapers is a newspaper that's local to where I live. I mean, fairly local. It's the Jamestown newspaper, which is a small city south of Buffalo, not far from Seneca territory. In fact, it's really just down the road from the Seneca Allegheny territory. And so he wrote this column, and I'm going to read bits of it. I'm not going to read the whole column. I almost, on one hand, I hate to even give this guy an audience.
That was my exact thought when I was reading it. Like, what's happening, and why are we talking about this?
Well, and I'll explain why I'm talking about it, because, well, maybe I'll do a little bit of preface here. 62 million people voted for Donald Trump. Now, are all 62 million overt racists? Well, probably not, but all 62 million are pretty tolerant of racism. And I got news for you. There's a fair number of racists on the left, too. There's a bunch of racists who didn't vote for Donald Trump. Now, you look at and here's the other thing on that. Only 57% of the eligible voters voted. So there's still another 40% of the population that don't even register on left, right, and really kind of show their colors in terms of literally show their colors in terms of how they vote. And you got to bet out of that 43%, there's quite a few people who harbor ill will towards people of color, Native people included in that as well. So I lay that out there. So when Pat Buchanan, who it'd be great to say that he represents some sort of fringe right, but he's being printed in newspapers. I've told you before, one of the things that most people aren't aware of, that native territories are almost always surrounded by a fairly strong right-wing conservative population. Well, and this kind of is evidence of that. Now, his whole column was based on whether the United States, and it has to beg forgiveness for the crimes of the past or something along those lines. I'm not even, but you can look it up. It's again, it's Pat Buchanan. It's a column he writes, and it was in the Jamestown paper. But you can go to patbuchanan.com. It's like the second
.org, Buchanan.org.
Oh, he figures he's an org, right?
Yeah, I was confused about that too.
But I want to read parts of that because part of what he originally was addressing was the demand, if you want to call it that, from the president of Mexico of Spain to apologize for their the crimes they committed against Mexico in terms of colonization and conquest and all that other stuff. And so that kind of set him off. But it also, mixed in there was, these conversations about reparations and about, what obligation the United States or any of those colonial nations had towards to make right any of the sins of the past. So here's this is from within the body of his column. He says, now no one denies that great sins and crimes were committed in that conquest, meaning the conquest of Mexico. But are not the Mexican people, 130 million of them, better off because the Spanish came and overthrew the Aztec Empire? So I'm going to keep going here.
I'll let you finish.
Did not 300 years of Spanish rule and replacement of Mexico's pagan cults with Catholic faith lead to enormous advances in civilization and human rights? And then he goes on, and again, he's making the case that it's okay that all this stuff took place, because the people are better off. I mean, he's literally trying to say slavery, yeah, it was bad, but in general, black people are better off because of it. Native people. I mean, he's going on and on about this stuff.
Are you?
No, I got more. Go ahead.
No, I'll wait because you might just say it.
Okay. He also says, so he questions, whether this is really that bad, or is there never a justification for one nation to invade another, conquer its people, impose its rule, and uproot and replace its culture and civilization? Is cultural genocide always a crime against humanity, even if the uprooted culture countenanced human sacrifice? I got more, but I want to stop there. So he's questioning whether genocide can be justified. And this is the crazy part. Oh. He throws in the human sacrifice thing.
Yeah.
Can I remind people that Christianity is based almost wholly on a human sacrifice? Not just Jesus Christ, who was humanly sacrificed by his Father, which, if you go to the Old Testament, you can also see the old dude was asking, who was it? That's Isaac to Abraham, kill your son. He wanted Abraham to commit a human sacrifice of his son Isaac. This is part of that culture. This is part of that Catholic faith, the Christian faith. And there is, a few people died in that flood that was purported to have happened, where Noah and his zoophilia thing going on. But so this idea of human sacrifice is a major part of the Christian faith, and I suspect some of the other religions of Abraham as well. To suggest that they were justified in committing genocide against the people who may have been committing human sacrifice. Well, I got to tell you, you've done plenty, and beyond the human sacrifice. And you could argue that everything from crucifixions to let's not forget what the Spanish did to Native people in the islands. They were crucifying Native people down there. They were doing it in honor of their human sacrifice. That's what they were literally doing. They were burning people. They were hanging people. This is the stuff that was a part of that of that genocide. So to listen to this right-wing nut say this thing, not only is it infuriating, but then I got to back off, because then I got to go back to what I said in the beginning. There's a whole lot of white people who believe some of this stuff at some level. And Reggie, you were talking about it on a show earlier this week, where you can see even people, WBAI listeners who Trump not my president. I'm against racism. That racism comes out when once you cross a line, you start talking about people having the right to have a driver's license, or people having certain rights that you have. All of a sudden, yeah, well, that might be that might be a step too far. And so you guys start seeing this stuff, and I hear it in my callers here. The first caller last week, I got Jeff Doreen playing Beatles tunes in Mohawk. And I get a guy calling, hey, that sounds really great, but, I don't really believe in this whole idea that appropriation is a bad thing. Isn't what Jeff Doreen's doing appropriation of
culture?
Of a culture? I don't know what culture he thinks that he was taking over on by singing a song. I mean, I guess we're appropriating England because we're speaking English, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what. I mean, but there's a level, I'm going to say it, of racism. And I know that, look, I heard about some of the calls that come in here, not just to my show, but, there's some people that I just hate white people. No, I don't. But let's be honest, white people, racism is not a right thing. It's a white thing. And I've said it before. And when Pat Buchanan says this stuff, and this is printed in a newspaper in Western New York and everywhere else, there's a lot of newspapers that carry his columns. There are a lot of you who agree with some level of this thing. I mean, this idea that Native people that in the Western Hemisphere, what happened to all you guys was so bad, but you're better for it. You guys have blue jeans now, and we gave you the Bible. We made you. We gave you. We civilized you. Well, I got to tell you, a friend of mine from Hawaii, he recorded a video, and he talked about there was a documentary called Cannibal Tourism. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen this thing, but they grabbed these people from the Isles of Papua and they brought them to New York City. And what this Hawaiian friend was saying was that he thought this was going to be this highly exploitive documentary, but the whole thing got turned on its head because these so-called primitive people who came from an unassimilated culture into New York City, the first thing that they noticed wasn't the skyscrapers, folks. It was people sleeping on the street. And he's saying, and so the immediate thing that came to mind was, how is this civilization? What is so great about this if this is civilization? Because I got to tell you, you aren't so civilized. I mean, when I think about the things that you've done historically and still do today, I mean, in my culture, we never would have had a homeless segment of our society. I mean, we would have said, sorry, we've only got we're saving the medicine for a higher class of people, so we're not going to treat you when you're ill. No, that wouldn't have happened. We would have let people starve. Look, we may have all tightened the belt a little bit together when we experienced drought or famine or whatever else, but we never would have let somebody just sleep out in the cold in the rain. We never would have done that. But you guys do it all the time, and you'll walk by. I'm in New York City. I see people walk by. I mean, look, I'm not saying that I give every homeless person I see, money out of my pocket, but I do on every trip down here give somebody something. But I watch people every day walk by like they're not even there. They ignore. And so you can look at the pretty glass buildings, and you can look in the Macy's window at Christmas time, and you can ignore the fact that there are people literally freezing to death on your streets. And that's civilization. So, look. So when
read that next paragraph.
Okay,
because that's the one that I was going to say.
I'll get to the next paragraph. Let me pull it up again. Sorry. And I do apologize that we're not streaming live, but we'll get this thing. All right.
This one.
Okay. Did the Aztecs have a right to be left alone by the European world? If so, whence came that right? Which leads to another question: are all civilizations and cultures equal? Or are some more equal than others? That's always a stupid question, equal than others. Or are some superior? Before recent decades, most Americans were taught to believe the West stood above all other civilizations, and America was the supreme manifestation of that. And much of the world seemed to agree. As for the assertion that all civilizations and cultures are equal, that is an ideological statement. But where is the historic and scientific or empirical evidence to support that proposition? How many people really believe that? Well,
that was what I got from this whole article was the assumption of what we were. How does he know? How does he know who the Mexican folks that he's referring to, how did he know how they operate? Because one, he's white.
Yeah.
Two, did he learn this from books that were written by white people that were in the process of colonizing Mexican folks? Where's your source of knowledge come, and how do you, like, the amount of entitlement and of knowing and the lack of checking yourself was so apparent through this whole, I mean, that's kind of what
and to answer his question,
way,
where is, from so where is it said, that that they should be left alone? Where is it said that that it's wrong?
Why does it have to be said? What?
Well, the fact is that it was said, though. You can go back to 1913 when this idea of denationalization was being talked about as a war crime. By the time you come out of World War II, it is clear. In fact, they don't even call it denationalization. That's when Carl Lemkin develops the word genocide. Genocide was born out of this notion of eradicating a people, and it was a war crime. It was a crime against humanity from the 20th century on. I mean, from the mid to early 20th century on. So for this guy to stand up and say, well, can we honestly say that all genocide is a crime against humanity? Yes. And it's a very well-established principle, except, I guess, if you are an overt racist.
But it also, I mean, great that it is said in terms of, like, legislation and policy. But that aside, like, what communities need, like, this rule to be like, yeah, don't take over and take all the resources from and wipe people from a space and then exploit that land? Like, that's only a colonizing and see, what's implied in all this stuff is that, the reason for doing this stuff, the reason for destroying cultures is because those cultures don't deserve to exist. And that by destroying those cultures, you can implant a better culture. That's the belief. And so this whole idea, look, it's a little early in the game to determine whether, this so-called American experiment has worked out or not. Look, I know the vast majority of people who are listening to this show think that, God bless America, America the beautiful, and all that other stuff. But you know what? The United States is the leader in global warming. The United States is the leader in a militarized planet. They are the leader in this stuff. They are the biggest threat to human civilization and humanity as it exists today. And why was that? And so when you want to measure and you want to say, but isn't it great? Isn't it great? And can't we make it great again and all that other stuff? I'm sorry. I have a difficult time with this stuff. So, look, I mean, I don't know what kind of response I'm going to get here on the phone. I'm sure there's going to be some of you guys, because I get some of you guys each week that have a real problem with me exposing what is some of the truth about racism. But it's what I do. It's part of what I do. So, look, I'm going to take a break here, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to try to get a fair number of calls in. This is John Kane with Johnny Rice, and this is Let's Talk. Thanks for listening.
Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Seems like nobody cares, nobody knows. Well, mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, brothers and sisters, we've all lost someone. I thought every life mattered, each and every single one. Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Seems like nobody cares, nobody knows. do. The people in power, they won't listen to me and you. We gotta keep on fighting if we wanna know the truth. Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Seems like nobody cares. Nobody cares, nobody knows. Highway 16, where did our sisters go? Highway 16, oh, where did our sisters go? Seems like nobody cares, yeah.
All right. Let me give the number out. The number is 212, as if you really need it. 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of this show. I think I might have got a little bit of a fire lit. We'll see what we get out of this thing. But we got a few people lined up already, so we're going to get right at it. Caller, you are first. You're number one. What's your name and where are you calling from? Oh, I got to put my headphones on.
Hello? Hello. How are you?
Am I on the air?
Yes,
Yep.
you are. You are.
Okay, greetings to the beloved family. And John, sometimes let people finish their thoughts. Sometimes you're jumping on that button too quick. But I want to share an anecdote around Pat Buchanan and Donald Trump. I'm sure it's online. 2000, Donald Trump asserted himself into the presidential race because he said Buchanan was also running under the Reform Party, and he inserted himself saying he wanted to protect the Reform Party essentially because of the racism. And he actually is saying at one point after Buchanan makes his, and it's not so much dog whistle as foghorn and bullhorn. And there's Donald Trump basically saying he wants to push back on Buchanan's racism. So that's where that is. That's sort of interesting in these.
Well, he shouldn't push back on it.
Yeah, well, he was singing a different tune. Remember, he had always been a Democrat, until he got on this power track. But the other point I want to make, John and Shawnee, is that I'm less concerned in a certain respect about Buchanan and the Trumps, etc., because I'm seeing emerging, and the digital landscape has a lot to do with it. Laura Flanders earlier is doing a very interesting series on where we're heading with all this technology. But what it seems to me is that, for example, people on Facebook who used to be friends with people are now shutting down to the respect that they can't return phone calls and talk on the phone, and their only window of operation. So what that window of operation is, just the screen, the digital world, and that to me is much more dangerous than the Buchanans and the Trumps, because we really don't have any way to be truly organized and come together. It's just, to me, it's just going down into a rabbit hole. It just keeps going. At one point when I called in, I shared a project that I'm working on called CIRC, Circle of Inquiry, Response, and Concern. When the community is not moving in the right direction, we have no way to address it. So I don't want to give out a contact, but people need to put their thinking caps on and come up with a way. You know how they used to tell us, we didn't have courts, we sat down with the elders. You can't even get people to return your phone calls once they get involved.
I want to get a chance to respond, but I also have a bunch of callers lined up. So, well, Shawnee asked the same question. Why even talk about this thing with Pat Buchanan? You didn't even really know who Pat Buchanan was. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I'm seeing increasingly in not just the show here, but in places, in many of the conversations that I'm having, a lot of the stuff that I see on social media is that that Pat Buchanan isn't the lunatic fringe on the right. there are a whole lot of people who are grabbing onto pieces of this. And if he can package it up and get it put out on in newspapers, even in small town newspapers like Jamestown, New York, and across the United States and across the internet, then somebody's got to answer back to it and say, no, you're wrong. Genocide is always a crime against humanity. There is never a time that you can suggest that it's okay. So that's why I want to talk about it, because I got to tell you, there is, again, running the numbers, 70% of the adult population in the United States is white. And there's a certain level of white privilege that rests with all of them. And there's a certain amount of racism that dominates or that takes over some of those numbers. And if we don't push back, and as a person of color, we need white people to step up and step on some of those comments from guys like Pat Buchanan, not to normalize them, not to normalize. Look, we spend more time laughing at Trump than we actually do condemning him. And at some point, he's got to be more than just a clown. And it isn't just Trump, because what he's speaking to, just like Pat Buchanan, is a sentiment that has existed perhaps a little bit beneath the surface, but it's always been there. And until we are more successful in convincing people that we all have something to contribute here, and the idea of wiping out cultures and wiping out human beings, killing people in the name of a greater good, because that is what's being perpetuated by columns like this. Yeah, there was genocide. Yeah, there was slavery. But you know what? Black people and indigenous people, they're better off for it. So that's what I wanted to mention.
I also wanted to comment on the social media aspect, because I think you're true. And as somebody, I'm like, I don't even know where I guess I'm a millennial, but I see how fast this technology is going, and also how it's impacting us as human beings. So the rates of mental health are skyrocketing. The rates of depression is skyrocketing. The number of suicides are skyrocketing. And what that's doing is making people more antisocial. So when you're antisocial, you're spending more time online, mimicking what it's like to be social. And this creates opportunities for people like Pat Buchanan to be able to have a platform for people to talk about, and for people who are angry and isolated to draw towards something that seems maybe like they're a part of. And so this kind of all ties it together, is like the super speed of technology is making us more isolated and more lonely and
polarized. Yep.
And it's sad. And I hope that we will eventually, we can catch up to how it's impacting us.
All right, let me go to the next caller. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from? Go ahead, caller. You're up next.
Hello?
Yeah. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Jerry calling from New York.
Hey, Jerry. Thanks for calling and be a part of the show.
Not a problem at all. I love the show. I make sure I get out of work on time to catch the full show. Love to hear about the issues you bring and the native culture, language, what's going on, the status, the different regions, the callers. This is a great show, and I really wish you guys continue it and that people contribute. I plan to also join as a BAI buddy. The whole channel, this whole station is new to me, so this is a mind-blowing experience over the last, I'd say, 5 to 6 months.
Well, I appreciate that.
And what you said earlier about, you seem to be apologizing for bringing these things out, and I felt bad. I had to call. I said, I don't want this guy to feel bad about speaking the truth, about being honest about the dynamics that exist in this country and exist in Western civilization, quote-unquote civilization. You're speaking truth, man, and you should never apologize for that or feel guilty or bad about that. The thing that's really scary is that I know you know all of this stuff as a Native American or as a Native person, but you said it earlier also. Where are the people who are white that know these things, that understand these things? Why aren't they speaking? Why aren't there more numbers? I know there are certain people who are. There's a gentleman, ironically, his last name is White. I can't remember his first name. But he speaks to this idea of Western culture, Western civilization not being what everyone thinks it is. And he's a white person. Mm-hmm. But there aren't many like him. They really don't get airplay anyplace else other than BAI. And as great as this station is, I believe, oh, my goodness, if more people listened, if somehow this station was more mainstreamed, and I don't mean mainstreamed in terms of the content, but more in terms of the numbers and having a larger signal. But bottom line is you guys are doing an excellent job, and please continue to to bring up these topics and these subjects. Both of you are very brave, and you're doing a great service to many people, and to even those who are pretty much ignorant and naive. When they hear you, it's my hope that they also start to change, or at least allow some of this knowledge and some of this content to bake in, and they begin to at least adopt a different idea or different ideas about Western civilization and about how great America is or isn't, and saying, there's this one guy, St. Ignatius Loyola, Pope Innocent III. He wrote a great piece about people, Europeans, and it's called "On the Misery of the Human Condition." Have you heard of it?
Yes, I have.
I think that there's a very visual description of a type of human being, where they're born from and born of, and their nature and ideas that they have innately. And unfortunately, to me, that it makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of conversation about things like epigenetics, and what that leads me to believe is that perhaps a certain level of racism has, managed to saturate even the DNA of what came out of Europe, and that's why it's so deeply entrenched. And so, I agree with you. Hey, look, I do want to mention one thing. Look, I don't want my apologies to come across as too as too sincere. It's kind of like that apology when you say, "Oh, I'm sorry if what I did offended you." Which is to say, I'm not sorry I offended you. I'm sorry if what you interpreted as what I did offended you. Sorry, yeah, so that was a sorry, not sorry. So I wasn't really apologizing. This is, the fact is that I know people struggle with this. Reggie and I were talking before the show about George Carlin, and his ability to raise issues that people probably didn't agree with, but because he was a comedian and because he had a way of delivery, he could make people laugh at something they didn't necessarily agree with, and then have to take it home. And look, I'm not a comedian, and I appreciate Jerry's comments. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping as I bring up some of this stuff and I talk about the absurdity and where the absurdity comes from, that people will say, no, I'm going to push back against that, and that's what we need. So when you ask the question, where are those white people to step up? Look, it wasn't Native people. It wasn't the downtrodden people who said that genocide is a war crime. That came out of the nations of Europe, the United Nations, and before that, like I said, coming out of 1913 is when there was the first conversations about it being a war crime to strip a person's national character away and implant another one's. That wasn't coming from us. That was something that scholars and political scientists and historians, that they were recognizing it over a century ago. So the fact that we've got a religious nut, who gets all kinds of play on the internet, on television, and in print, saying stuff like this, we've got to push back against it.
But
right.
I will say thank you for that positive call. Because
yeah, no, very much. Yeah, no.
I enjoyed it.
We do appreciate
and
that.
I appreciate you acknowledging our show and the work that we have to put, the extra work that we have to put into this and discussing these topics.
Absolutely.
So I do appreciate that call.
All right, caller, you're up next. What's your name and where are you calling from? Caller?
Hey, buddy.
Yeah.
Ciao. Willie from Long Island.
Hey, Willie. Thanks for calling.
Hey, yeah, I'm calling because last week when you was on the show with the Beatles song.
Yeah.
I don't know. And one caller say that you misappropriating culture or whatever.
Yeah, that was the first caller.
Like you didn't attack. Yeah, it really. I learned so much from you. I'm a Latino that was born here, and just brainwashed, basically. You taught me more history about Native American than when I learned, the 8 years in school.
Mm-hmm.
And after learning all of that, I thought Native Americans was dead.
And
I've been listening to you guys for about 10 years, and yeah, I noticed that we've been getting these these fascist colonialist calls, like trying to. I guess WBAI is doing a good job because the word is getting out to attack WBAI. You guys are spreading a lot of love, and I just wanted to thank you guys.
Thank you.
Well, and that's one
Two
of the
callers
reasons.
in a row.
That's why we want to do this stuff, because I know that there are people listening to the show who agree with Pat Buchanan, who like the caller from last week, who would dare to suggest, because that we sang a song in our language, a non-native song in our language, that we were somehow doing some appropriation of white culture. I mean, it is absurd, but that's why we do the show. We want to try to set some of the records straight.
But I also just want to take a minute and encourage you to explore yourself, because I know you identify as Latino, but that was how you were colonized. And
well, he said he was brainwashed, so he was already kind of accepting.
But that's my point. Is that when it was interesting that you thought that natives were all dead, because you're an indigenous person as well, and there was no difference between your indigeneity and our indigeneity, but a colonized line. So we're essentially all, we're both indigenous, but we were imposed from these made-up lines. So, I mean, not everybody who identifies as Latinx feels comfortable identifying as indigenous, but it's just something that I would encourage you to take a look at and to consider.
Well, and I would also, to his comment, there are more than one way to consider a people dead, and so we, even if there are plenty of brown people alive, the question is how many of us are really prepared to embrace an identity that has survived the genocide. That's one of the questions. All right, caller, we'll go to another caller. We got one there? All right, caller, you're up next. What's your name and where are you calling from? Go ahead.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, this is George calling from Jersey. How you doing?
Hey, George.
Hello.
How you doing?
All right. What was I going to say? Are you guys going on a wait with? You guys didn't say anything. I just caught you on now. You guys weren't going on with the white thing again. Why kill?
Oh, you're cutting out. You're cutting out.
Say it again?
You weren't doing the kill Whitey thing again, were you?
Oh, when did we do the Kill Whitey thing? I don't remember doing a Kill Whitey show.
No. Every time I hear you guys talking about whites do this and whites do that, I just want to be a little colorblind a little bit more. You know what I mean?
Well,
Why? Why do you want to be a little more
anyway,
colorblind?
Power to the people, and whoever has the land last has the land. You know what I mean?
What was that?
I mean, that's how it works. If somebody takes your land, you can't cry about it forever. You got to get over it. You know?
Why?
This isn't Israel. You know what I mean? You guys lost. You gotta
No,
get
but why do we have to get over it? Why do you think that?
All right, this guy you can tell he's bailing on us. This guy's got no answer. Again, that's part of the reason we've been doing this show.
I just want to get to their point, because I mean, I don't understand why are you calling and saying to get over it? Like, if that happened to you, if somebody took your land or took your mother or took your sister or took your child, well, are you gonna get over it, not cry about it, and get over it? Like, that doesn't make sense. I don't understand what you could possibly say to me to that argument that would disprove the way that we feel about our land or family. I don't get it.
Again, some of the listenership is of this ilk, and that's the bottom line. I mean, that's the bottom line. So, I mean, and again, we do get white supremacists who call in, and this clearly is one of them. He's one of the guys who believe that. And again, I guess I could make another point. When people talk about conquest, when I talked about the doctrine of Christian discovery and even the case that codifies it into U.S. law, one of the passages that the Justice John Marshall wrote talked about the extravagant pretension that they would pose that conquest and discovery were the same thing. And what he said, and this is what he wrote in his legal opinion. This is Johnson v. McIntosh, 1823. He said, if you can assert it from the start that discovering a people were the same thing as conquering them, and sustain that argument, in other words, not be taken down in that argument, then we can make it law. We can make it true. So what people call conquest and the taking of land, most of that didn't even happen. I mean, look, I'm not saying that there weren't murders, there were massacres, and there was land fraud, but this idea that we were a conquered people. This is, you literally had a Supreme Court Chief Justice who said, look, there's no difference between discovering a native people and conquering them. And so, I mean, that's kind of the absurdity of all of this stuff. All right, we got probably time for at least one more caller. So let's, all right, we'll do two more callers. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from? Caller?
Hi, my name is Jay. Hey, my name is Jay. I'm calling from New Jersey.
Hey, Jay. Thanks for calling.
I just about what you said. There are a lot of people in this country that they don't read. They say my country, they don't want anybody to come here. They don't know any different because America is destroying a lot of places, and yet they don't want people to come to America. If you don't want people to come to America, leave South America, Africa, wherever alone. Don't go destroy those places and say, oh, stay where you at.
Right.
Exactly.
Like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Central America, all those places. How can you destroy somebody's homeland and tell them not to get out, or not to go look for something better or where to live?
Well, and there's more than one way to attack a people. And again, when you look at the drug, what people want to call the whole war on drugs and all that other stuff, the United States is the largest consumer of these illicit drugs. So at the end of the day, when people want to complain about what has become of some of this black market industry or economy in South America, it's fed by U.S. dollars, and so it's military that is all around the entire globe, creating havoc everywhere. I mean, it's ironic that all of this Mueller report stuff and Russia interfering with the U.S. election. The irony is that today the United States is trying to eliminate an elected president in Venezuela and put their own puppet in his place. I mean, and the United States has a history of doing this in South America, in Central America, in the Middle East, in places all over the globe. So there's irony there.
Also, the last caller who was saying like you can't go cry about it, whatever. Like Americans have been the ones doing it, not so much people been doing it to us. So of course, when you're coming from the colonizing perspective and you're the one who has all the power and privilege, like it's mind blowing how he can't take 2 seconds to think about something from the other side of the coin to make sense of something. He's just like one lens moving forward and trying to make sense of it all.
And the reality is George probably doesn't own a piece of land himself. So the reality is we're not crying about land loss. We're getting our lands back. We're fighting the system. So he's the one calling in to try to just use words to hurt people. So I don't know. All right, we got time for one more caller. Caller, you're our last caller of the day. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yes, I'm calling from Manhattan.
All right.
I'm actually took offense of the earlier caller, and these are the kind of mentality that, and I'm an educator myself, but this kind of mentality tends to destroy and rip off the page of history that tells what history is supposed to tell.
Right.
And I take a bigger offense of that because every group project their history, pain, sorrow, glory, and everything. Why do you want me to remove the pen in my pages of history? I would never tell someone from the Jewish community to get over a Holocaust. I would never tell any other ethnic groups to get over whatever is the pain of their history. So if this guy wants to destroy or distort history, as many already done or trying to do, at least it should come clear. But don't tell me to get over something that belongs to me. That's my pen.
Absolutely.
I decide to feel it. It's just like slavery. I decide to portray it the way I want to. Don't tell me to get over it. I personally took offense of that.
I agree. And also his colorblind comment about wanting to be more colorblind. Okay, sure. So why don't we pick a color that is not white? Let's pick a color of black and brown and make systems equal for everybody in that way. What does that mean for you? That means that you're going to have to take pay reductions. That means you're going to have to not call and take up so much space. And then I would like you to be fine with all of that and not complain about any of that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, the absurdity of George from New Jersey is matched by the absurdity of Pat Buchanan, former candidate for the president of the United States, right evangelical, and who gets to step on a soapbox or up in an altar and preach to people on a daily basis. So this is kind of why we do what we do here, and I appreciate the callers who called in. And of course, look, I don't mind taking on the Georges. I mean, I don't mind taking on some of these folks who want to come in with their racist diatribe. it gives us a better opportunity to address, just how absurd that is. And maybe it's folks like us that'll help put some of the stuff back in the box that guys like Donald Trump managed to unseal and uncork a little bit. So anyway, hey, I want to thank you guys for listening. We will post the video of this show up on YouTube. I'll probably get it up tomorrow. Again, I apologize for not having the Facebook live stream. I'll work out the bugs and we'll get it back right for next week. This is John Kane with Johnny Rice, and I want to thank you guys for listening. And again, thank you for coming out last week, and we look forward to catching up with you next week. Yahweh.
No.